So now we're going to look at the Deuterostomes. There are two main phyla within the group of Deuterostomes. We have like echinoderms and chordates. So let's look at echinoderms first. Echinoderms have an endoskeleton made of calcium carbonate. As adults show pentaradial symmetry, that means there are 5 different angles in which they can be divided into equal halves. Even though as adults they have radial symmetry, their larvae has bilateral symmetry and they descend from ancestors with bilateral symmetry. They have a water vascular system for movement. They appear about 600 million years ago, and their nervous system is a central ring with a branch into the 5 parts of the organism. And they're capable of regeneration, and if you cut a branch of a starfish, they can regrow that piece. So we see a basic anatomy of echinoderm that has pentaradial symmetry. Echinoderms include 5 major groups: starfish, brittle stars, sea urchins and sand dollars, sea cucumbers, and sea lilies. So even though these organisms look very different from us, they are our closest relatives in the invertebrate groups, as they are the only invertebrate group that are Deuterostomes. So now we're going to look at the other Deuterostome group, Phylum Chordata, which is the one that includes us, chordates. Chordates include 3 main groups: the Subphylum Urochordata, which is the tunicates, Subphylum Cephalochordata, and Subphylum Vertebrata, which includes us. And even though these 3 groups might seem very different to you, they actually have some common characteristics. All chordates have a dorsal nerve cord. Dorsal is through your back, so they have a nerve cord that goes through your back like our spinal cord. They have a notochord. The notochord is a structural part that gives rigidity to the back. In our case, it's been replaced by the vertebral column. They have pharyngeal slits or pharyngeal pouches. These are the ancestral gills, and you still see those during our embryonic development. And they also have a post-anal tail, at least during their development, or they descend from ancestors that had a post-anal tail. So let's look at the 3 subphyla of the phylum Chordata. Urochordata are the tunicates. They're some fascinating organisms. Even though the adult is sessile, it doesn't move and filter feeds. The larvae looks very similar to any other chordata. They have a notochord, a dorsal nerve cord, and they have a gill with slits and a tail. So they satisfied all the characteristics of a chordate. Even though as adults, once they settle into a place, they take a very different structure. Cephalochordates also have the same characteristics as all chordates, with a notochord and a dorsal nerve cord, a post-anal tail, and pharyngeal slits. And finally, Subphylum Vertebrata, which is the one we belong to. Also, we have 4 characteristics of chordates, and in addition to that, we have some things unique to vertebrates. In our case, the notochord is replaced by the vertebral column. All vertebrates also have a head with sensory organs, a closed circulatory system, a fully developed excretory system, and an endoskeleton either made of bone or cartilage. Here we see the main characteristics of vertebrates: a head that encases the brain. We have a vertebral column, a dorsal nerve cord, a post-anal tail, limbs, a heart that powers the closed circulatory system. In addition, all vertebrates also have a liver and kidneys. So let's look at how the group of vertebrates evolved. And today we have these major groups of vertebrates. We have jawless fishes that include lampreys and hagfish. Then we have cartilaginous fish, such as sharks, bony fishes, and then the tetrapods would include amphibians, mammals, reptiles, and birds. The evolution of vertebrates started, the appearance of the group started somewhere in the Cambrian with the appearance of all major phyla, including chordates, and they've continued to diversify until today. A major step happened during the Devonian period when bony fish appeared, and an ancestor of those fish made the transition into land and started the diversification of tetrapods, which are the vertebrates that colonize terrestrial environments. Starting with the most basal vertebrates, lampreys and hagfishes, and the thing they have in common with all vertebrates is that they have a head, but they do not have jaws, as their name, jawless fishes. So these are modern lampreys and hagfishes that exist today, and ancestral jawless fishes of the Ordovician period, like this ostracoderm. After the jawless fishes, we have the evolution of the jaw. One of the first groups that diversify after the evolution of jaws are sharks or cartilaginous fish. And the jaw evolved from these gill arches that were bony structures used to support the gills, and over time become thicker and become support for the mouth that then develop into a jaw. So this was a giant step in the evolution of vertebrates because having a jaw enabled vertebrates to hunt down larger prey and became more effective predators. We associate sharks with jaws. So some of the earliest fish to have evolved jaws were the placoderms and acanthodians that we can see in the fossil record from the Devonian period. Along with jaws, there was also the evolution of teeth, and teeth evolved from scales on the skin of the animal. We can still see those scales in sharks that have similar characteristics to teeth. After cartilaginous fish, we have the evolution of a bony skeleton, and we have the appearance of the first bony fishes. Having a bony skeleton was beneficial for fish because they provide them with a stiff structure that they could anchor muscles against, and that resulted in very efficient movement. And in bony fishes, you can start to see a very typical vertebrate plan where you have a vertebral column, a set of ribs, and a skull that encases the brain. Bony fishes have been incredibly diverse and continue to be very diverse. And we have two groups of bony fishes. We have ray fin fish, which are the typical fish that you have seen and that you probably had at your dining table, and a more rare group of fish that are the lobe fin fish. And nowadays they are mostly in deeper water and they're not quite as abundant. But they used to be very abundant, and these lobe fin fish are actually related to our ancestors. They're called lobe fin fish because they have fleshy fins, and inside of those fins they have bony structures. This is important because those fleshy fins in the ancestor of us serve the fish to support its body weight as it transitions out of water into land. After the lobefin fish, we have the evolution of legs and digits. And with that, we have the appearance of all tetrapods. The common ancestor of tetrapods evolved from one of those lobefin fish that had bony structures in its fins and was able to support its body weight out of the water. Likely, oxygen levels were starting to decline in water, and oxygen is plentiful on air. So this animal was able to evolve the ability to use oxygen from the air, like some lungfish that exist today still do. Lungfish have lungs that they're able to breathe air, although they also have gills so that they can also get oxygen from water. In this fossil of the Tiktaalik, we see features of fish, such as gills and fins, but we also see features of tetrapods, such as the bones that we have in our hands and legs are pressed inside those fins. They also have a neck, which you don't see in fish, and they have lungs. This first group to colonize land had to overcome these challenges of life on land, such as supporting their body weight, and they evolved legs that could support their body weight. The other challenge, if you take your gills out of the water, they will collapse, but lungs supported by a rib cage will be able to do gas exchange outside of water. And since movement out of water requires high energy, these animals evolve a 3-chamber heart that is more efficient than the 2-chamber heart of fish. Another challenge of life on land is that eggs that are meant to grow in water, once you lay them outside of water, they will dry out. Amphibians, the way they solved this problem was by continuing to lay their eggs in water. They continue to be dependent on water for laying their eggs. Similar for fertilization, you cannot release your gametes into the air because they will dry out. So amphibians do fertilization in water, and their eggs need to be kept in water while they develop. And the other problem with life on land is you might dry out. So amphibians have a tough skin that reduces water loss through their skin. Today we have 3 groups of modern amphibians. We have the frogs and toads, we have salamanders, and we have caecilians, which do not have appendages. And after amphibians had dominated for a while, we see then the appearance of a new group of vertebrates, the reptiles. A main characteristic of reptiles and the groups that came after them was the appearance of the amniotic egg. The amniotic egg It's an egg that is protected by three different membranes, and those membranes allow gas exchange for the embryo to obtain oxygen and dispose of waste without losing water. And this was a key adaptation because this allowed these animals to be able to lay their eggs outside of water and not worry about desiccation, not worry about the eggs drying out. This happened sometime in the Permian period. Reptiles made several modifications to what amphibians had come up with. In support of the body weight, reptiles have a more efficient leg anatomy. If you look at a frog, the frog has the legs pointing sideways, while reptiles have their legs pointing more directly down of the body, and that makes them more efficient in terms of energy for movement. They also improved the anatomy of the lungs. While amphibians were breathing by forcing air into their lungs, reptiles are able to do thoracic respiration, which is similar to what we do, by expanding their chest to inflate their lungs. The three-chamber heart of amphibians, although it allows the blood to reach the tissues at higher pressure compared to the heart of fish, it has the problem of allowing the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Reptiles improved on this design by having a partially divided ventricle that decreases the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood at the heart. And their main advantage was the appearance of the amniotic egg that allowed eggs to be laid on land without drying out. They also improved the watertightness of the skin of amphibians. Reptiles have a very watertight skin. They can live in very dry environments and not dry out. These are some of the groups of ancient reptiles that dominated different points in the Permian, Triassic, and Jurassic. Today we have three main groups of reptiles. We have the turtles, the lizards, and the crocodiles. And although most of the dinosaurs went extinct, a group of dinosaurs was able to evolve the ability to fly. They are the ancestors of modern day birds. In order to adapt to flight, several changes had to take place. For instance, for flying, you need to be very light and you need to be able to stay warm without increasing your body weight. And feathers provide that level of insulation without adding too much weight. That need of being light also means their bones are hollow, but they need to have strong bones because the muscles for flight need to be anchored to a strong skeleton. So they have hollow fused bones to support their flight. Flying also needs a lot of energy, which means you need a very efficient circulatory system to provide oxygen and nutrients to your muscles. Birds evolve a four-chamber heart similar to the one that we have, but they evolved this independently. Since they have high oxygen demand, they need a very efficient respiratory system. In our case, when we breathe in oxygen and we breathe it out, air comes in and out through the same path. So that means that air that we just remove oxygen from gets mixed with new fresh air that is coming in. This doesn't happen in birds because they have evolved a way to circulating the air just once through their lungs so that used air and new air do not mix. And since they also have high metabolism, they're able to maintain a warm body temperature through metabolism, just like we do, but they also evolved this independently. And birds have been very successful, are greatly diverse, and they've taken up almost any habitat on land. And from the other group of ancient reptiles, the therapsids diversified and become what we know today as mammals. And the main characteristic that defines mammals is having hair, having mammary glands to feed our young, endothermy, which means we can keep our body temperature through metabolism, and a placenta. There are three main groups of mammals: the monotremes, which are the most ancestral, such as the platypus; marsupial mammals, which are mostly in Australia, but we also have a common marsupial on the Americas, which is the opossum; and placental mammals, which are the ones that you're the most familiar with. And within placental mammals, we have the group of primates, which is again the group where we're in. Within primates, the most ancestral group are the New World monkeys. You can distinguish them because they have a tail. They have the Old World monkeys that no longer have a tail, and the apes, the hominids that include us and our closest relatives like gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans, and gibbons.